Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus, episode 58. I am the show's host, Kyle. I got a ton of interesting news stories to talk about today. Several very important stories have been written. Some current events that we have been following have developed. And so I certainly have plenty to talk about today. Over the weekend, for those of you who are in the Foreign Policy Focus private Facebook group, know I watched the Putin interviews and I plan to do a show on those interviews this week. Initially, I was kind of planning on putting that out today. However, I just saw there's so much news. There's a story by Gareth Porter and Seymour Hersh that I really want to talk about. So I decided that I'll do the Putin interviews on Wednesday. These are, of course, the 4 hours or so worth of content that Showtime, I believe, has put out where Oliver Stone, not Roger Stone, interviews Vladimir Putin. I have to say, if you have an extra 4 hours laying around and feel like sitting down watching it, I absolutely recommend doing it. For me, it was definitely entertaining TV. The only, I guess, criticism I would have is that unfortunately I wasn't able to find like just an audio version where you could listen to Stone and Putin talk with a translator. That way you don't have to like watch and read all the subtitles. But I wasn't able to do that, so it looks like we actually do have to sit down and read subtitles, unless you speak Russian, of course, for 4 hours. So you could do that, check out. If not, I will be doing my own talk about it on Wednesday's show. So everybody tune in and check that out. If you are liking the show, share the show. I think today's show is going to have an awful lot of interesting and important content, so if you want other people to know, just click the share button at libsyn.com, Foreign Policy Focus, libsyn.com. Alright, let's start off at the top with the two really important stories coming out of Syria. The first is by Seymour Hersh. Of course, Seymour Hersh is an award-winning journalist who did tons of good work on the Iraq War. I would say my, probably the article that he wrote that was most enlightening to me was, of course, the Ratline article that detailed how Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama utilized Libyan rebel groups, some of whom were known Islamists and jihadists, to funnel those fighters and weapons into Syria to aid in the fight against Assad there. This most recent article, unfortunately, didn't run in some major U.S. media outlet, even though, like I said, he is a very renowned journalist who's done a lot of amazing work. He unfortunately had to publish it in a German newspaper, which makes it really difficult to access for American readers. Of course, just in my own experience, I was trying to read the article and I couldn't tell when it was written because there was no date on the thing that was in English. You also had problems with, for whatever reason, the ads in the article kept messing with where my browser was on the screen, so I had to scroll back. It's a long article, it's a pain in the ass. Unfortunately, we don't get this article at the New York Times or at the Washington Post. It's in a German paper, but all the same, it's out there, it's on the internet. Thank God this is 2017 and it's accessible to just about everybody on the planet. This particular article deals with what happened on the April 4th attack at Khan Shaykhun. This is, of course, the alleged chemical weapons attack by the Assad government on the civilian population there. This has caused quite a bit of controversy. I would say still the big narrative among the American people is probably that Assad did carry out this chemical weapons attack. Of course, this resulted in Russia attacking Syria, or the U.S. attacking Syria, and has led to really the mess we have today. So before we get into the article, I would just like to preface with that prior to this attack, and actually Seymour does mention this in his article, that the week leading up to this attack, we had both Nikki Haley and Rex Tillerson, who were by far the biggest anti-Assad hawks in the Trump administration at the time, coming out and saying that the U.S. policy is now not to go after Assad, we're just going after ISIS. If you remember, beginning of April, Assad is absolutely winning the Syrian civil war. It looks like, he's on a clear path to victory at this point, other than the unresolved issue of kind of what's going to happen in the Idlib province and what's going to happen in the Raqqa province. It looks like Assad is rolling towards victory day by day. Then on April 4th, we have what the U.S. labeled a chemicals weapon attack by the Syrian Arab Army against the people of Khan Shaykhun. However, like I said at the time, and a lot of other people said at the time, let's slow down. We don't think this is a chemical weapons attack by the Assad government. There are several things that Seymour Hersh brings up to kind of poke holes in the narrative that this was a chemical weapons attack. One of the first is just what the victims were suffering from. Well, I guess the easiest way to do this is just kind of what was going on before the attack in the start. Russia had information that there was a 2-story concrete building in the town of Khan Shaykhun that was going to have a lot of high-level Al-Qaeda members meeting, about 4 of them at a single time. Russia, on their part, had drone surveillance of this building for about a week or so before the attack, trying to understand exactly what was happening at the location. They even warned the U.S. that this attack was going to happen. I guess one thing that happens whenever you have 2 world empires bombing in the same country is that both, empires are trying to get intelligence and gather informants and everything like that. And so sometimes before these attacks take place, and probably most likely the targeted attacks where, Russia or the United States thinks that a leader of Al-Qaeda or something is in this location, so they're going to attack it. So Russia lets the U.S. know, hey, we're going to hit this target on this day, so if you have any informants in there, tell them not to show up to work that day, that way they don't get killed too. Also, the U.S. or Russia notified the United States of this strike as they normally would through the deconfliction channels. Seymour Hersh brings up the fact that there hasn't been any actual U.S. or Russian aircrafts running into each other over Syria, and generally, while there's a lot of very fast and well-armed jets flying all over Syria's airspace by several different countries, there hasn't been any conflict so far, and it kind of does show the deconfliction line. They must be sharing a lot of information. And so for those reasons, it doesn't suggest that a chemical weapons attack would have occurred on that day. There is the whole story around the smart bomb. Unlike the way the United States treats Saudi Arabia, where we'll give them billions of dollars of smart weapons at a time, Russia really doesn't give that away to the Assad government to use in stockpile, but the Assad government has a particular strike they think is really important. They will ask Russia for one of these laser-guided munitions in order to, hit the exact target they want. So the bomb that was equipped and used to carry out this attack was a 500-pound laser-guided munitions. This bomb would be, I guess, big enough and powerful enough to set off any chemical weapons. Or, as Seymour Hersh brings up, the Al-Qaeda fighters in the region, one of the ways they control the local population is to control the resources. A very important resource would be sanitary and cleaning supplies, so bleach, chlorine, stuff like that. And then another one would be fertilizer, probably phosphorus-based fertilizer. So a lot of that is going to be stored in Al-Qaeda warehouses. And so the smart bomb was powerful enough and could have set off secondary explosions that would have led to these chemicals mixing and burning within this building that was destroyed. If it was a smart bomb loaded onto the plane, I guess smart bombs don't carry, or at least this particular weapon wouldn't have carried a chemical weapons attack. They would have to use a different kind of munitions to, effectively explode and go off. Also, there were secondary explosions reported at the site, and chemical weapons don't cause secondary explosions. More evidence to contribute to this was the Medical Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, reports say that while some people died of sarin-like injuries, other people smelled of chlorine and seemed to die from chlorine-like injuries, and so it would suggest that people died of different chemical weapons around the area. So this would, of course, support the theory that Al-Qaeda just had a whole bunch of stuff stored up in this warehouse, and when it all burned, all these chemicals got released. And then there's also the matter of what U.S. intelligence officials say. It seems that Seymour Hersh has quite a few members within U.S. intelligence who talked to them and all said, no, this absolutely wasn't a Syrian chemical weapons attack on this area. I guess he had a quote from a conversation that some sort of military member had with a member of the intelligence agency the day of the attack and said, why are we attacking Syria? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't really matter if we elected Trump or Clinton, which I, of course, have been saying all along. And so all these, different factors I bring up all really suggest that it probably wasn't Assad who carried out this attack. It was a U.S. or a Syrian targeted strike on an Al-Qaeda target that led to chemicals being burned and fertilizer being burned, releasing toxins in the air, and unfortunately killing a lot of people. And look, while what Assad is doing in Syria is absolutely criminal, the narrative that the United States then used, that Trump then used to carry out an attack on Assad 2 days later, it was simply based on a false narrative. We're going to get into a little bit of that now. So this attack was planned at Mar-a-Lago. I guess it's kind of going to be probably a famous meeting, the Mar-a-Lago meeting here. What happened is that Trump was presented with 4 plans. He was very emotional around this time, saying, how could you do this to children, the poor children? The plans ranged from the first one being do nothing, the second one being to do what the Trump administration did, which was to carry out an attack on a Syrian airfield, but do so in a way that causes minimal damage, and Russia is forewarned about the attack. Number 3 was to execute the 2013 plan that had been drawn up for Obama in response to the fake chemical weapons attack in 2013. In which the United States would have really crippled Assad's air force and really prohibited the Assad government from being able to carry out any airstrikes, at least for some time. And then the 4th option was to assassinate Assad. Now, one thing that apparently occurred at the meeting that was very interesting is that Rex Tillerson wanted to fly some B-52s over to Syria, but then only strike airfields. And so while the 3rd option would have required B-52s to come in and hit a lot of targets, Tillerson wanted to use the B-52s on the airfield. The reason that this wouldn't have worked is that flying the B-52s over to hit Assad would have led to the ground-to-air missiles that Russia has set up in Syria to be launched against the B-52s. And so that would put America in a position where they would have had to destroy the ground-to-air missiles, and therefore probably Russian troops would have died because they're the ones that operate ground-to-air missiles. That would have been an absolute mess, and thank God they went with option number 2. I guess Pompeo, it doesn't sound like Coates, who heads up the DIA, actually attended the meeting. Mattis was the real high-level military man in the room, but other than that, it was just a bunch of Tillerson-like State Department weenies and Trump level advisors. I don't know if McMaster was there or not. Obviously, while it seemed to me that a lot of the intelligence people were saying we tried to do the best we could to get Trump not to, escalate more against Syria, there just seemed to be a very few number of these people in the room being able to tell Trump at the time, hey, this is a really bad idea. So I don't know. Just interesting who Trump was surrounded by at this important time. Some of the fallouts from this attack were, one, that the U.S. government tried to implicate Russia in this attack. They said Russia was at the base, Russia would have known about this, and this was actually one of the points that showed that likely wasn't a chemical weapon that was used as a bomb, because none of the soldiers who were handling the chemical weapons had on hazmat suits. There were Russian soldiers in the area, so certainly if there was chemical weapons, the Russian soldiers wouldn't have been, just openly exposed to it. Sarin is clear and odorless, so if it would have been leaking or something, nobody would know. People would just start dropping dead. And so the U.S. really made it the goal to say, hey, look, Russia gave them the bomb, Russia was there, Russia knows about this, and really tries to implicate Russia. Of course, this is all going on through the Russiagate phony baloney nonsense, and so this is just another point to show how much Trump loves Putin. And then, of course, after Trump carried out the attack, that Trump doesn't like Putin, so, kind of used on both sides of the argument there. Also, one of the more dangerous points, and something that Seymour Hersh points out, is that it allows the Syrian rebels to know that if they could get Trump to believe that Assad carried out a chemical weapons attack, that's enough to get Trump to attack Assad. Of course, while Assad continues to win the Syrian civil war, at least against the rebels, things for Assad haven't been going quite as well recently, especially when it comes to relations with the United States. The United States, of course, tried over several, probably a week or so, they tried to keep Assad from being able to reach the border with Iraq, and therefore linking up with the Iranian power Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq and being able to transfer more supplies along to Syria. This is certainly will help Assad win the Syrian civil war, so the U.S. try to naturally hit some Iranian-backed militias in Assad with airstrikes, trying to prevent this from occurring. We also had the United States shooting down a Syrian fighter plane. Me and Will Porter talked about that a lot on Friday's show. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, check out that episode. The other kind of implication of all from this isn't just that Assad's doing well, but I think this allowed the United States to increase their military action against Assad. Trump now knows that Congress will let him get away with launching 59 Tomahawk missiles at Assad airfield once a month, so I guess he figures that transfers to being able to shoot down a Syrian plane and drop a couple bombs on a Syrian allied troop. It seems to me that, this is a very dangerous game we're playing in Syria. Eventually Assad or Putin will draw a red line and retaliate against the United States if the United States continues to increase. Great article by Seymour Hersh. I suggest everybody checks it out. It's a little vindicating for me having somebody like Seymour Hersh back up what I was saying when I was citing the postal reports back in April. So awesome. Other article I want to talk to, and that is Gareth Porter going over the history of arming the rebels. Of course, this all starts off in Libya and kind of starts off at the same point where Seymour Hersh's previous article, the rat line between Syria and Libya, leaves off. The U.S. gives weapons to Libyan rebels who are tied to Al-Qaeda. Those rebels are then transferred with the aid of the CIA and Hillary Clinton from Libya to Syria. Once in Syria, Obama is pressured by the military-industrial complex, the generals within his administration, Hillary Clinton, and then senators like John McCain and Lindsey Graham to arm the rebels and give fighting support to rebels against Assad and the Syrian government. Of course, Obama, to his credit, never goes that far, but does give TOW missiles to Saudi Arabia to then give away to the Syrian rebel groups. Of course, one of those TOW missiles was eventually used to shoot down a Russian helicopter, and so here we see a case of these weapons ending up right in the hands of the jihadists and then used against Russia. It seemed pretty likely that the U.S. knew that this would happen. Of course, we have an interview with Hillary Clinton from February 2012, I believe, where she says that the Syrian rebels are supported by Zarqawi, who, of course, is top Al-Qaeda guy, I think bin Laden's right-hand man, Al-Qaeda in Iraq man, current leader of al-Nusra, and so he's on one side of this fight, and if the U.S. decides to take the side of the Syrian rebels, they're then on the fight of Zarqawi. So Hillary Clinton says, if you're a Secretary of State and you're looking for a way to have regime change in Syria, it simply doesn't exist. Hillary, unable to take her own advice, goes along with the arming of the Syrian rebels anyways. The rebels go from Free Syrian Army groups, the quote-unquote mythical moderates, right into the hands of Al-Qaeda. This was either by force or by agreement or by trade. In some cases, there seemed to be times where maybe the CIA looked the other way a little bit. They knew these people were tied to Al-Qaeda, but we need to get the weapons to the rebels, so we're going to give them to the Al-Qaeda, the Al-Qaeda linked groups anyways. Other times it was maybe the CIA getting played or just the CIA not caring, but they would give them to rebels who would then turn around and sell them to Al-Qaeda. And then other times the rebels may be honest people, but Al-Qaeda just come and kill them all and then take the weapons for themselves. So you have a situation where essentially the U.S. is pouring weapons into Saudi Arabia or into Syria, sometimes through Saudi Arabia, sometimes through more direct CIA support or even Pentagon support, and the weapons always end up in the hands of the terrorists. The terrorists, of course, then use those weapons against Assad. I'm sure some of those weapons have to flow over to, Western Syria or Eastern Syria and Western Iraq to fight against U.S.-backed Iranian militias there. It turns into a real pain. It's kind of unknown exactly what's going on as far as the weapons shipments. Just that the CIA is spending about $1 billion a year on the program. And so, again, we see a case where And again, we have a case where I feel pretty vindicated. Of course, I have been saying on my podcast the whole time, but just in general for years, that the United States is arming terrorists in Syria, and we're doing this in an attempt to overthrow Assad, but at the end of the day, it's bad for the American people. Of course, most people ignore me as a kook or suggest that I am some kind of, birtherism type that thinks Obama is a secret Muslim giving arms to jihadists, which of course that's not my point at all. My general point is that Obama, like I said, to his credit, stopped from arming them more, which he, would have done if he was a secret Muslim, but obviously he's not. But at the same time, stopped short of doing the right thing, which just would have been to come out and tell the American people, hey, John McCain over there who keeps telling you to arm the Syrian rebels, well, he's telling you to arm Al-Qaeda. Do you really want to do that? And so, two articles, two great journalists, enjoyed reading both of them. I suggest everybody check out both of those articles, learn a lot about what's happened in Syria and current U.S. policy there. Now I want to run through some other news stories. The first one is that the United States F-16 intercepts a plane off Russia's coast in the, I believe, Baltic Sea. The plane was carrying the Russian defense minister, and then I guess there was a kind of an uncomfortable encounter with a Russian fighter plane where the Russian fighter plane showed the American fighter plane that, it had arms on it and it meant business. Of course, just looking at this from the other perspective, and just to say, what happens if this is the other way around? If John Kerry or if James Mattis is leaving Alaska, flying to Seoul, and in international waters, 2 Russian jets then approached that plane over the Bering Sea or something like that, I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. Retaliated by shooting the plane down. It seems to me that would certainly be something that would be on the table and that the United States would be considering. I don't think that James Mattis would be very happy and would probably be suggesting retaliation against Russia right now. He, with Russia kind of directly threatening his life. And so just remember when you hear these stories and then the media kind of portrays it as just more Russian aggression and action against the United States. In reality, what this is a very disturbing trend where the U.S. continues to act very hawkishly against Russia. The next story is that F-35s have resumed out of the Yuma Air Force Base. Whatever software upgrade needed to occur in the F-35 has been completed. It does seem that the F-35s at Luke Air Force Base are still grounded after some pilots there had symptoms of hypoxia. In Congress, we have Congress introducing a budget that will have the United States spending an extra $37 billion on military every year. This is over more than the money requested by Trump. Other news is that U.S. Marines in Norway have been extended through 2018. Russia is very upset about this and saying that Russia perceives it as a threat and it's destroying Nordic and Russian relations. Updates on the Qatar situation is we have Saudi Arabia releasing a list of demands that Qatar must meet by July 3rd. Qatar says they won't meet those requirements that include cutting all ties with Iran and shutting down Al Jazeera. Turkey continues to stand by Qatar and says they will leave their troops in Qatar. Saudi Arabia's king has announced that his son will now be the crown prince. Formerly, his crown prince was his nephew. The new crown prince is the current defense minister who has, of course, waged a bloody and brutal war in Yemen. In Afghanistan, we have 29 people killed in a car bombing in Lakagar. This is, of course, the capital of the Helmand province, where so many U.S. Marines have died fighting there over the years. The Taliban is once again approaching on taking that. In Mosul, 100,000 civilians will remain inside ISIS-held areas, with an estimated 500 fighters in that city. Of course, the United States continues to carry out a pretty heavy bombing campaign. If you think of what 1.2 square miles is, and then you put 100,000 people in there, that there's just so many people for every one of those bombs being dropped. It seems so dangerous, and hopefully the liberation will happen soon. Of course, me and Will touched on the Mosul issue on Friday's show, so if you want more news on Mosul, check that out. And we talked about the Al-Nuri Mosque being destroyed. News out of Egypt is that the President Al-Sisi has approved the transfer of islands in the Red Sea to Saudi Arabia. This has been a pretty contentious issue in Egypt, and I know that the leader there is currently kind of on rocky footing, so it'll be interesting to see kind of what goes down coming forward, if this will add to some of the people's being upset with the leader. They say it is, kind of see it as him coming over, taking charge, and then selling off the assets. Egypt is kind of in a bad economic situation after some coups there and revolutions, so not probably the brightest time to be an Egyptian. In Syria, a couple other stories we have is that the U.S. is not tracking civilian deaths caused by the YPG. The United States says that maybe the YPG is looking into those, but this just goes to show that whenever we talk about how many civilians that the United States has killed in Syria, it never includes the people that ISIS kills with U.S. weapons or the people that the Kurdish fighters kill with U.S. weapons, because they simply don't look into this. This, of course, is a story that everybody would have missed. I think if it wasn't for Nancy Youssef, who confronted United States Defense Department spokesperson about it and asked if this was being tracked. So, good for her. In Raqqa, the SDF, Syrian Democrat Forces, have captured another district from ISIS. Israel carried out bombing attacks against Syrian Arab Army forces. This was in southern Syria near the Golan Heights. Of course, in the last show, Will brought up the fact that Israel is paying off or helping to support some Syrian rebel groups, some Salafist-linked Syrian rebel groups near the Golan Heights. These rebels were battling with the Syrian Arab Army. Some stray mortar fire wound up in the Golan Heights, and so Israel carried out airstrikes against the SAA. Of course, from everything I read, it seemed to suggest that the fire that fell into Israel was probably linked to the Syrian rebel groups and not to the Al-Qaeda forces, and was just kind of straight fire from a battle. Other news is that we have Iranian-backed militias making progress in Deir ez-Zor. Of course, this was the one place where it wasn't looking great for Assad a month ago or so, but is now seeming to turn the tides there. The report I read suggested that that highway between Damascus and Baghdad is helping to supply some Iranian-backed forces and getting more fighting instruments in to take ISIS out there. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights announced that 478 people were killed by U.S. coalition airstrikes in May. Overall, Air War says that 4,000 people have been killed between Iraq and Syria in the war against ISIS. In Pakistan, on I believe Friday, we had 85 people killed by suicide bombings across Pakistan. There are several different attacks, and then the next day, 153 people were killed when an overturned oil tanker on a highway exploded. Apparently what happened is when this oil tanker tipped over and was leaking oil, people saw an opportunity to approach the oil tanker and collect the oil for money. Eventually it caught fire and exploded. It's just absolutely terrible that people would die in such a way. In Yemen, we have over 200,000 people now having cholera in Yemen in the latest outbreak since April 27th, and 1,300 being killed from that cholera outbreak. And one of the few positive things I will ever say about John McCain, he is calling for investigations into allegations that the UAE and Yemeni government are running torture prisons in southern Yemen. There are U.S. reported ties to some of these prisons as well. And that'll do it for my show today. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. I know there was a ton of news in this show, and I spent a lot of time going over those first two articles, but I think they're so important. So if everybody could share this show, that would be great. If you like the show, subscribe to the show on iTunes and leave me a rating and review there. I think I already said share the show, but if I didn't share the show, check out my Facebook page, Kyle's Files. We hit over 100 likes last week, so if you haven't liked that, do it while it's cool. And check me out on Twitter. I'm at KYAALE. Thanks, everybody, and I will see you on Wednesday.